In this video, what we're going to be talking about is basic information about the nervous system that I feel is actually helpful and relevant, and a great way to kind of segue us into maybe diving a bit deeper into our nervous system and what that education can really reveal about our lives and how to support ourselves better. I feel it's really important to learn about some of these things, and more education isn't always helpful. I will admit that. Because sometimes when we're educating ourselves on any topic, specifically anything health related, we can sometimes over rely on the information we learn, and we stop really tuning into this infinitely wise system that we have. And so we kind of prioritize what we've learned and the information that comes outside of us rather than tuning into our own innate wisdom. And by that I mean, you know what's good for you. I can't tell you what's good for you. Your body knows what's good for you. And it essentially will always communicate that to you. You just have to be willing to listen. And if your attention is always on Googling what's good for me, what's bad for me, what's going on with me, I want to not support that, essentially, while still providing a pathway of educating. Because again, I do feel that it plays a role. I do feel that it is important. But ultimately, your greatest teacher is your body and your nervous system. So essentially what I'll be educating us on today is how to tune into that, how to experience our nervous system as a teacher. And in doing so, my hope is that you're curious enough to want to dive deeper with me with a healthy relationship to this information. Got it? Okay, I'm watching you. Okay, so I love talking about the nervous system, but what I love doing more is simplifying things to the point where, you can get the gist and you can kind of move on. And so here's the gist. Here's how I explain the nervous system to people in a very concise and coherent way. You have to be willing to follow me along an analogy, and you might have to surrender this attachment to having scientific words. But turns out your body doesn't really need to know the scientific words in order to really get the gist, okay? And so we're going to start with an analogy. I compare the nervous system to an instrument. It's very similar to an instrument in the sense, specifically like a stringed instrument. It's carrying a tone, it's carrying a song. So our nervous system is a vibratory system. It communicates to the rest of our body through vibration. And that is to say, if we were to look at an instrument, we know that when we pluck a string, it vibrates. And what we hear is ultimately the expression of information that string has the potential to express when movement is induced, when a force is applied. And so us, being living beings, we are being animated by life force. Life force is plucking our nervous system, therefore allowing this oscillation that is our experience, that is this carrying of information throughout our whole being. And this is how I essentially segue us into talking about how we're vibratory beings. We're energetic beings. Everything about us is a vibration, and our nervous system is no different. That is to say, if you have ever played a string instrument or have ever been around one, you know that it can either be in tune or out of tune. And in order to tune the instrument, we change the tension. We change the tension on the string. We either tighten it and essentially tune it to a higher note, to a higher information potential, or we can loosen it and tune it down to a lower information potential. And I don't necessarily mean that higher notes have higher potential in that sense. I just mean that quite literally their frequency is quicker, so we hear them as a higher pitched noise. And when we tune it down, lower frequency, lower noise. And so our nervous system is similar. We are essentially carrying the proper tension in our system to experience this spectrum of life. We know that a guitar string has pretty much a pretty finite spectrum through which it can express. It can be toned all the way down, but then it's too slack to really carry a tone. And then we can tune it all the way up, but then before we know it, it's like snapping, or like it's too rigid to carry a note. And that is to say, our nervous system is the same. We've got a spectrum of tension that we could be holding that more or less affects the music that we're playing, the song that we're singing, the life that we're living. Hopefully you're following so far. Now, what would essentially cause us to change our tension and therefore change our tone or the information we're expressing? Well, that's essentially the manifestation of life. Life is always in this flux of tension. And in a perfect system, in a perfect world, let's say just a nervous system that is, in essence, very in tune and coherent with life, what we will see is when life gives us a circumstance that might require us to increase our tension and increase our tone, I liken that to like a sympathetic state. You know, you're a little more uptight because you're vigilant. You're looking around for more information about your environment. And this is reflected in the posture. You might get a little up taller or might even bring the shoulders up. All of the body follows the tension of the nervous system. And so what we think sometimes is just postural issues is really a neurologic happening. And in an environment where there might be the need for sympathetic tone, we can appropriately register that and match that tone. And so that's the essence of a coherent nervous system. You can appropriately respond to your environment. So when threat is present, or maybe just the need for higher energy is present, we can modify our global tension and our global tone by receiving that and appropriately engaging with it. Now, when either the threat ceases to exist, we have either escaped it or we've, let's say, discharged the threat. Maybe we've befriended it in some way. What happens is we then appropriately let go of that cultivated tension. We don't need it anymore. It wouldn't serve us to keep carrying it on. And so that is to say, a nervous system that is truly coherent and healthy and well-tuned to its environment, engages highly, and then lets it go when it's no longer necessary to hold on to. And then likewise, if it's time to go sleepy, if it's time to rest, if it's time to integrate, really is what this state is all about. We'll tone the system down. We'll start to soften. This is why when we're sleeping, hopefully we're carrying a lot less tension in our physical system, because we are in a state of letting go, of relaxing, of softening. And this helps us integrate information. That is to say, it helps us integrate all the engagement we cultivated throughout our day so that we can learn from it and, again, let it go. So we don't need to carry it around. We know we can cultivate it when necessary, but we don't need to carry it around. It's not being worn as a defensive armor or as any sort of protection. And so we can go in through this spectrum of high tension and low tension as it appropriately allows us to meet the demands of our environment. Now, we know that we don't always flow this easily with life. This really is the essence of being in flow. We can match the tone of each moment. I didn't mention here that, yes, these are kind of like the ends of the spectrum. We got high tone in which we're really engaged. We may be ready to fight or flight. We got our lower tone in which we're ready to rest. We're ready to integrate. But there is essentially a middle spectrum in which we can call that being engaged or just present. We're not necessarily looking for threat and how to resolve it. We're not necessarily ready to rest, but we're present. We're in the midst of the happening. And this is essentially what it means to be playful, what it means to be, let's say, even creative, what it means to just be here. And it's a really simple state of being. It is kind of the most, let's say, outside of just pure rest and sleep, it is the most restful place to be, where we have the potential to wind up or down depending on what's necessary. And yet we can maintain this like flexible state. It kind of reminds me of in any video game, if you come up to like a non-player character and they're just standing in the corner and they're like they're just waiting for you to engage with them. But other than that, they're just, that's kind of like what that is. And yet we're obviously player characters. There's an essence in us, and it is making its way through us and animating us. So that is to say, that's probably our most peaceful state of being. And it is from that place which we have the most potential to wind up or down. But that's essentially where we return to once we no longer need perhaps a sympathetic tone, or we're awake and we don't need to be asleep. And that is the place, again, where we'll find our most playfulness, our most engagement, our most willingness to try new things. We're not already stressed out, so new things don't freak us out. We're willing to try a creative project. We're willing to maybe do something we've never done before. We might take up a new hobby. We might start a conversation with a stranger. Overall, this is the essence of social engagement. Our eye contact with people is really solid. We express our calmness, like truly on our face. You can tell when people are in this place because they're looking around, they're kind of taking in their environment. You can't sense any worry really on their face. Their face is reflecting kind of this calm presence and engagement. It's also reflected in our posture. Typically, we're more upright, not necessarily tight and rigid and upright, but we're willing to take in our environment. Not because we need to, because we're threatened, but we're curious. Curiosity really is the tone of this place. Curious, playful, creative, peaceful. That's honestly where we will be our best self, in the sense that we're free to be ourselves. We can be authentic here. There's no need to modify our authenticity for appeasing any so-called threat in the room or perceived threat in the room, assumed threat. We're not so disengaged that we're like, no, I don't really have any energy really or desire to engage with my environment. I'm just kind of tired. And so that is to say that middle state is where we will find the most peace and ease. We're not designed, however, to maintain any one place for very long. That middle place is easiest to maintain, but we're not really maintaining. If we were putting this spectrum onto a pendulum, this pendulum that would swing from side to side, if it were essentially self-swinging and sustainable, it would hang out in the middle the longest. Wouldn't that make the most sense? It would keep swinging, but it would stay more so in that centered place. And when the energy is needed to be ramped up, we would push the swing and we would slowly trickle back down into that place. And so that is to say, we're not meant to hold ourselves in any one state or another. It just so happens that naturally we'll float towards that middle more often than not, especially when we're not holding on to any stress. Should we think that it is our duty to hold on to things? Essentially what this means is we're chronically holding a tension in our system that is altering our global tone. This is like thinking that on an instrument, let's say the string is designed to be tuned to the note A. I was going to say G, but then I might say G string, and I won't be able to take myself seriously. Let's say the string is designed to carry the note A. Well, if I insist that that's wrong, and I instead want it to play D, well, then I'm going to make that string undergo a lot more stress and strain than it was designed for, because I'm not allowing it to essentially carry the tone it was designed to. I'm going to make it hold, technically, it depends on the instrument, but let's just say it's higher. Let's say I'm making it hold a higher tone than it was designed for. And we do this to ourselves. If we think that in order to be productive or a good person or somehow just in order to fit into society the way society says we need to fit into it, if I believe I can only do that through holding an unnatural tension to me, such as chronic stress, chronic engagement, chronic people pleasing, or being able to read the room really well so I can be the person that everybody needs in this room. That is not only unsustainable, but it's not our nature, which makes it unsustainable. And not only that, we're holding that tension in us. And over time, here's how the system adapts. If we're holding chronic tension, specifically in our nervous system, because we're needing to stay wired, what ends up happening is we encode that. We pattern that in. Our survival neurology says, like, oh, well, if I'm always going to be in a state of high energy, then I must live in a very threatening world, in a very threatening environment. So it would make the most sense if I could figure out how to maintain this the most efficiently that I can. And so we wire that strategy into our system, and therefore maintaining this higher tension that ultimately isn't our design, but the intelligence of the body says, well, if we're always going to be here, we might as well make it a little more efficient. And so we quite literally wire that into our system. We quite literally have these patterns in us that are altering our tone, and it shows up in our posture. Again, our body's always reflecting what's happening in our nervous system. So if we have these chronic tension patterns throughout our system, me as a chiropractor, I'm always curious, like, I wonder what the neural component to that is. And your nervous system is your interface for life. So I'm not just thinking like, oh, it's just something happening in the nervous system. No, this is something happening in you. You are the tone setter of your nervous system. You as in this life form within you. And all the adaptations you've made are also encoded into your nervous system. Some are for the better, some are not so great, especially long term. And so if we're going to essentially repattern, rewire, and heal our nervous system, what we have to be able to do is become a little conscious of the ways in which we behave and the ways in which we relate to our environment. And we have to ask, is this really how I want to keep going? Is this really how I want to keep relating to my environment and myself? Is this sustainable? How does this feel in my body? All these self-inquiry questions will start unraveling for us what really is this pattern all about? How does this actually serve me? And am I ready to let it go? Am I ready to just be myself instead of being this pattern version of myself that I created to get along with an environment that I thought was unsafe or highly judgmental? This is the journey we're all on with healing, and it really is in the nervous system, because our nervous system, again, that's our instrument for life, and all the ways in which we have lived life up until now, depending on how that has happened, it is informing our current expression, because it might quite literally still be living within our nervous system. And so, because our nervous system is essentially the instrument through which our song, our life, our essence is playing, wouldn't it be nice if that instrument was in tune and regulated and coherent? Wouldn't it be nice if it didn't need to pretend it's a D note when really it's an A note? And so in order to help our nervous system unwind, which it knows how to do, let me just tell you that you don't need to force yourself to unwind. It will happen, but you do need to let go of the need to keep yourself in a tension pattern that's just not authentic. And this is the journey that we're all on. We're moving towards what we believe is a more authentic life, a more authentic tone, a more coherent nervous system. And the reason I like this analogy of our nervous system being an instrument is all it takes is us choosing to pay attention to things that truly resonate with us. Not things that seem good or bad, or like will feed this agenda or this strategy of staying safe or staying, a good person. Finding what actually resonates, what actually speaks to your soul, and following that. I promise you that's as simple as it can be, so long as you let it be simple. If you need it to be a little more complicated, you're gonna detour, and I believe that's part of the process. Healing is not linear. We are not just going from A to B. We're going all over the alphabet, and then we might end at B. And so your guiding light, your pillar or your beacon will be what resonates. Follow that. Tune into that. Pay attention to that. And think about how, let's say, in an orchestra, if the tone of A is played loud enough, then the A string on the unplayed instruments, it will start vibrating. That is the essence of resonance. If you follow this resonance of what really speaks to you, your nervous system's going to start resonating with that. And you're going to be very, very clear on what does not align with that resonance. What behaviors might have to get gone? What stories are you telling yourself that really are just not serving you? What people might have to get gone? And I promise you, yes, it's not easy, but it is as simple as that, following what resonates. And if you can really lean into that being like your priority in your life, what resonates, what brings out this sense of being alive and permission to be myself, and there's like greater meaning to the world and who you are and your purpose. You don't necessarily need words for it, but you just feel this greater meaning. That's what we came here to do. We came here to feel life, to feel alive, to feel that life vibrating through this instrument that is us. And that is my favorite way of describing the nervous system. We can definitely go deeper. We can definitely get a lot more physiologically oriented. We can talk about autonomic tones. We can talk about what it looks like to, let's say, store trauma or just past experiences that have yet to be integrated. How might that show up in our system? We can talk about all that. But to create an analogy of who we really are as instruments of the divine, I believe can really start pointing us towards what's our real goal here, what's our real mission, and can we really force an unwinding or a healing, or is it really just a matter of tuning our attention to that which innately heals us? And so if you like this video, if you like the analogy and the simplicity of it, I'm grateful. Share this with whomever you feel could really benefit from this. And if you'd like to learn more, stay tuned, because I will be releasing very shortly some online webinars for us to go real deep into some of this information, more of the technical and more so educational pieces about the nervous system, where we might use a little bit of more scientific words rather than just creating an analogy. But the analogy works, and I hope it works for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.